Joining us today are John Cromer and Amanda Settlemyer, along with Jesse Lachemia of the Turtle Creek Council of Governments. John Cromer is a housing and development consultant who specializes in strategic planning, public agency capacity building, and program and policy development for urban communities and metropolitan regions. Amanda Settlemyer is a public administration professional with over 19 years of experience. She currently serves as the Executive Director of the Turtle Creek Valley Council of Governments, which represents 20 municipalities in Allegheny County. Now I'm going to turn the presentation over to John to begin.
Great, thank you. I'm glad to have the opportunity to speak with you today. Just a very little background. I was Director of Housing for the City of Philadelphia for about 10 years, ending in 2001. I ran the Camden, New Jersey redevelopment agency for a year during the state receivership of Camden, and have done a lot of consulting work with Pennsylvania communities that have vacant property and economic disinvestment problems. I drafted the housing and economic development elements of the Act 47 recovery plans for Altoona and Erie, and have been following up on land bank planning in both of those communities as well. Just in terms of overview, and I'm sure Amanda and Jesse will get into this in the latter part of the presentation, there are a couple of sort of overriding issues that have an influence on code enforcement and its effectiveness. One is that there's a distinction between the kind of licensing and permitting and code enforcement that's associated with new construction and new development. In most places with any population or any economic development activity, there is a process for doing that. There frequently is not a consistent, similarly well-organized process for property maintenance code enforcement. That is the approval and enforcement of regulations associated with existing properties and the maintenance of existing properties. So that's one issue. The second issue that is really important is that with respect to the first kind of code enforcement associated with new construction, new development, there is training that's available through state professional organizations, and there are certifications by trade for every trade that will participate in the construction project or development project. With respect to property maintenance code enforcement, there is some training, there are some certifications available, but it's not nearly as extensive or as comprehensive as the training and the certification process associated with new development. I guess the good news is that more capacity building opportunities have emerged, particularly in recent years, and that there are opportunities for municipalities and counties to learn from one another about best practices. So with that, let me just go ahead. I think everybody in the call probably is aware that all Pennsylvania communities, both urban and rural, are aware of blight and blight problems. It's no longer a problem that's simply associated with the major cities or with big cities. And I think one sort of indication of that is that on the legislative side, a lot of the leadership for anti-blight legislation has come from legislators who are representing primarily rural areas. One good example of that is Senator David Argall from Schuylkill County, who's played a major role in shaping a lot of the anti-blight legislation in recent years. And this is really important because, as I expect you're well aware, the idea of acquiring and flipping properties has become a lot more popular. And as I'm sure you know from experience, it's not that easy. And if you've seen, Tarek and Christina on HGTV, you know that at a certain point, everything goes into fast motion and suddenly the house is framed out, suddenly the roof is replaced, or when they talk about the cost of doing something and Tarek says, well, we'll have to put in an entirely new sewer line and repipe the whole house. That would cost us $1,000 or something, and you're aware that the reality here is a lot different. So it's definitely not that easy. In addition, many of you have probably seen what's been happening at tax claim sales, tax collection sales, where a lot more people are showing up for the public auction of tax delinquent properties. In many places, a lot more of those people are from out of the area. They're absentee investors. Frequently, the people that are aggressively bidding on properties don't seem to have a clue. So some people who are bidding on properties at these auctions aren't as well prepared as they need to be to take on the challenge of upgrading a vacant or very deteriorated property. And in response to these challenges, there's been a lot more activity at the state, county, and local level for dealing with this problem, based on a recognition that prevention and being proactive always makes a lot more sense. And I just want to touch on a few sort of basic issues that I think are especially important. Code enforcement in this respect really shouldn't be focused on, writing people up or issuing violation notices or hammering people for negligence, unless that's absolutely necessary. To a great extent, the goal should be communication and being clear about what the problems are and how to resolve them quickly, and doing as much as possible to achieve voluntary compliance. And to do that, getting prepared within city government or at the county level is really critical. A lot has changed really in the last 5 years with respect to new legislation and new tools that are available to deal with neglected properties. And it's important to educate elected officials about what's been going on, about how these new tools are being used in other places with characteristics that are similar to the places where you're active, and also to address any concerns about property rights. Why does government have the right to interfere with, a private property owner's property? And just to provide, where it's possible, examples of health and safety issues that have to be addressed that really override the property rights concerns, so that you do as much as possible to get the buy-in at the elected official level as possible before moving ahead. Community-based organizations, nonprofit organizations, and service organizations are really critical as sources of information and support as well, and helping them to understand an inspection process, for example, and how rental property inspections are being conducted really is critical. Frequently, the problem associated with a neglected property is that the owner is an elderly person and may be living there, or may have moved out and just hasn't gotten around to doing anything with the property. And so frequently, rather than hammering that person, possibly communicating with them through a service organization or counseling agency may make the most sense. And so these local resources can be very helpful, even though they may not be strictly housing-related organizations. The same thing is true of the real estate professional organizations. I think for the real estate brokers, it's pretty clear that there's value in dealing with neglected properties, and that's going to help strengthen the local real estate market. In many communities, even in smaller communities, there's frequently a rental property owners association. In some cases, it's very well organized. In some cases, it's more ad hoc. But meeting with them, understanding who is active, what properties they own, what their concerns are, is really critical. And for somebody in government or in a nonprofit that's assisting government, the first meeting can be tough. You'll get an earful about how terrible, the current system is and how awful the city or county is. And that's a good first step. You've got to go through that, and frequently I think you'll find that some of those concerns or questions are very well founded, and that there's a need to try to be responsive. In other cases, yes, there are people that are always going to find fault with the government, that are always going to feel that there's government overreach, that there's unfairness, and so on, and you'll have to live with that. but frequently having that communication with people who are in the market will help you identify the good, responsible property owners and help you get acquainted with them and benefit from their perspectives. And then an overriding issue is just determining whether government or the public is ready for a certain initiative. Yes, it will be wonderful to have annual rental property inspections everywhere in Pennsylvania, but in some places it's not going to happen. You know, the city council is not going to go for that, and that may not mean that they're bad people. It's just that it's not time for an initiative like that. It's going to take a lot more education and local capacity building or something else before it can happen. I guess the good news is where you run into a brick wall with respect to one initiative, there are other opportunities that you can pursue. But being realistic about what you're going to accomplish this year is really critical. There are also some basic issues to consider with respect to how to get organized to deal with property maintenance code enforcement issues. And they are really basic, but in some places that should have done this a long time ago, there are no staff that do nothing but property maintenance inspections. They haven't received any training. They don't have any certifications at all. They're in some of the larger places creating a separate property maintenance code division that is separately managed under the code enforcement department from those people that are issuing the building permits for new construction and doing zoning and so on is really important. A lot of new equipment is available now. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And also something as similar as uniforms. In some larger cities in the past and probably now, the code enforcement people have worn the military-style uniforms or police-style uniforms, and having somebody dressed in that manner knocking on your door really isn't a good idea. You really don't want to create an impression that this is a police power or that there's a coercive sort of part to this enforcement. Again, you really want to make this about communication to the extent possible. And then the issue of budgeting separately and looking at the cost and outcomes associated just with that property maintenance code enforcement function is really important. Distinguishing between proactive inspections where certain staff will do nothing but go out and, property by property go through a particular area or district, and those inspections that are in response to complaints, call-in complaints and people showing up at a government office to complain. In the past, frequently, code enforcement has been complaint-driven exclusively. There's been no proactive approach. In recent years, to a much greater extent, there's been a balance between responding to complaints and then proactively trying to deal with problems, assessing conditions on a proactive basis, again, so that preventive steps can be taken. And then because other departments, other city and county agencies have a hand in real estate issues and property condition issues, figuring out how to establish working relationships, ongoing working relationships is really important. And in some cases, in larger areas, having some kind of formal group that meets, a task force that meets on a monthly basis and just goes through the list of problem properties and has a discussion about what should be done is important. In other cases, it's not that important to create a new structure or try to get people to show up for a monthly meeting. And one example of that relates to the fire department and the people who are handling fire safety. In many places, there's something called a do not enter list in which the fire department identifies properties that are in such dangerous condition that firefighters will not enter them in the event of a fire emergency. And so to the extent that the code enforcement people know what addresses are on that do not enter list and is working to deal with those properties, you can start complementing the responsibilities of the fire department and doing something about their primary concerns. So that coordination, again, can be very formalized or more ad hoc, but getting the value of that communication, those relationships, is really important. And then because, unfortunately, codes and legal standards are frequently ambiguous and there's a lot of room for different interpretations, communicating with people who will be out in the field about the inspection process and resolving communications so that to the extent possible, these differences can be resolved quickly and there could be uniformity in code enforcement. That's really important. In some cases, there's a feeling that contracting out the inspection process to a third party really makes the most sense because the third party company has professionals who really know the code very well and won't need to look things up constantly and don't need the training that local people would need. That may be the case in some places. In other places, the experience is that the third-party firm is too rigid, they're not flexible enough, the interpretation that they have has too much of a hard edge, and that lack of flexibility or the reduced flexibility is a problem. It's really an issue that has to be resolved on a case-by-case basis and a place-by-place basis. And then creating a schedule of fees and fines that's consistent with the program costs so that you're not accumulating revenue that's in excess of the amount that it costs to administer an enforcement program is important. And with respect to operations, again, determining who's going to be involved in property maintenance code enforcement, having them assigned, and then creating a year-long work schedule based on those assignments is going to be important. And again, thinking about the rental property inspection process, identifying or assessing what it's going to take to inspect every rental property in the municipality or the area, and determining what the workload is going to be and how to assign staff so that you're able to keep that cycle going and modifying it as needed so that you can achieve that goal would be important. There's lots of technology. There are a lot of products. If you have lots of money, you can spend lots of funding on this. But almost everybody has an iPhone. It's easy to buy iPads, and there are lots of ways in which these low-cost tools have been used very effectively in documenting property conditions and in issuing violation notices on site, printing them out on site, and creating reports that can immediately be emailed and archived instantly. So this is a big plus. In addition, GIS, to the extent that that's available, can be used to track inspections, the time needed to cover a certain area that's being inspected, and to review outcomes based on a mapping format. And then it would be wonderful if we could all do what Baltimore pioneered, the CityStat model, in which data was used to evaluate performance with respect to all kinds of activities, including code enforcement, in which there was a monthly, I believe, meeting of city officials to review monitor progress and review problems and make assignments. And it would be great if we could all do that, but it doesn't have to be that complicated. Just finding a way that makes sense for the place in which you're active, to review the caseload. Again, for example, that list of do not enter properties, that list of properties that you and the other agencies have agreed are like the top 10 biggest problems in the area, and reviewing collaboratively what's been done, what we're going to do next, using GIS and mapping to the extent that's available, and just doing that periodically so that you can monitor performance and make some intelligent decisions about how to use the capacity that you do have available. The judiciary is really critically important in property maintenance code enforcement. And the relationship between the people who are responsible for code enforcement and the magistrates and others who are the authorities who will make decisions about imposing penalties and fines, that relationship is really critically important, and it's different from one place to another. In some cases, magistrates are willing, and the president judge is willing to work with code enforcement people on establishing a uniform process for dealing with cases that have to be brought to the judiciary. In other places, you've got to deal with the magistrates one by one. And sometimes it's difficult, and in some cases, with a particular magistrate, you're not going to make progress very quickly. But it's really important to make the effort, again, as with the elected officials, review the legislation that's available and work with the legal counsel, the solicitor, or whoever is representing the code enforcement people to try to be responsive to any questions or concerns that the magistrates or the other judiciary representatives may raise. In some cases where you don't have a president judge is going to be helpful, and where the magistrates are not going to all be as communicative as you'd like them to be, it may be that the Bar Association could be helpful, and that possibly the Bar Association would schedule like a luncheon presentation or something, and where you might get someone from another place that is already doing what you'd like to do, just to provide this information in a low-pressure environment. That might be helpful. And then to the extent that you are able to communicate and there are opportunities to talk about how are we going to work together, how do we make the job of the judiciary as easy as it can be, establishing a uniform approach for taking cases to court, and number one, deciding what kinds of cases are going to be taken to court, what are the threshold criteria for going to the judiciary, what kind of evidence do you want, photographs, what kind of documentation do you want to see, do you want witnesses to be called, do you want neighbors to show up or not? There's nothing in stone that provides guidance on these issues, and they have to be addressed by the code enforcement entity and the judiciary really on a case-by-case basis. And so establishing a process and reaching agreement on issues like that is really important. Let's see. So is establishing a fee and a fine structure. In some cases, some of you have heard magistrates say, you can't find your way out of this problem. You've got to resolve your differences with the property owner. And so looking at places where there is a fee schedule in place that's consistent with what you want to adopt, and then drafting your own schedule, reviewing it with the judiciary, and addressing any questions about reasonableness of the fines and penalties that you are considering imposing in advance, I think would be really, really important. Before passing this on to Amanda and Jesse, I just wanted to touch on a few initiatives that have been very successful in a number of places in Pennsylvania, and we're very fortunate in that we have these models that we can look at and make intelligent decisions about replication opportunities. One is the idea to which I referred previously of just establishing an inspection cycle for inspecting all rental properties in the jurisdiction. In some cases, Allentown, for example, where I've worked with Eric Weiss, the former codes director there, who developed this presentation with me. The first rental housing inspection cycle took 5 years, to do Allentown. It was much longer than they had inspected, but the second time around, I believe it took 3 years, because in that first slow cycle, they'd addressed some of the big problems, and it was easier to go around the next time. As I said, in some places, politically, you're not going to get the buy-in for a citywide rental housing inspection process, but there may be opportunities to get there from here, in part because this approach has proven to be very effective in a number of different Pennsylvania jurisdictions. Another much easier initiative is what's called a point of sale inspection. And what that is a requirement that for every residential property that is part of a sales transaction, a code enforcement inspector will visit the property and conduct an inspection, not to do a write-up of every little thing, but just to identify any significant health and safety code violations that need to be corrected, just major issues that need to be dealt with. And as a condition of sale, as a condition of getting the deed recorded, the violation or violations have to be corrected, and the buyer and seller have to figure out who's going to do it, who's going to be responsible for that. That's especially helpful, number one, in ensuring that serious problems get addressed as part of the sales transaction, and also with respect to the buyer's perspective, informing the buyer about problems with the property that are going to have to be dealt with before the transaction is concluded. Quality of life ticketing for nuisance code violations like, knee-high weeds in the front yard and rotting sofas on the porch and junk car in the backyard has also proven to be very effective. This is a process in which minor violations, nuisance violations of that kind, are just ticketed, just as a parking authority officer tickets a car, issues a ticket that basically tells the owner, you're guilty, pay us, you owe us $25 or $50 within 10 days. If you want to appeal, there's an administrative appeal process. Here's how to initiate that. And in the event that you're not satisfied with the result of the process, then we go to the judiciary. So that saves a lot of time in sort of diverting those minor violations that are important but don't require judicial intervention into an administrative process, which is much faster and much less expensive. Organizing an initiative like that can be very effective, but most effective when there's a lot of communication in advance, a lot of outreach to community-based organizations and property owners, letting them know that this is going to happen, again, so that you can try to achieve compliance before going around issuing tickets to everyone. But this has worked well in a number of places in Pennsylvania. And then thinking about the good rental property owners, we know we want to hammer the bad ones, but what are we going to do about the good ones? Can we give them a break with respect to inspections or fees, or can we provide rebates for them? Can we give them credit for participating in a workshop that's offered to all rental property owners and managers? Can we give them some kind of a certification that they could post on their property to show that they're, a 5-star property based on the city's rating system, that in coordination with the Rental Property Owners Association? Thinking about what you're going to do for the good ones, I think, is as important as deciding how you're going to go after the bad ones, and that's something to bear in mind. And then thinking about the Blighted Property Review Committee. I know many of you are familiar with what that is, but in Reading and a number of other places, those groups have been kind of re-energized and made a lot more effective than they had been previously. Rather than simply certifying properties and hoping that the redevelopment authority will then use eminent domain, what they've done in Reading has been to hold public hearings, 2 of them, a certification hearing and a determination hearing, in which they invite the property owner to come in and testify. They hear the testimony, they ask questions, and at the same time, they are communicating with the property owner where possible to try to do as much as possible to create a redevelopment agreement and enter into a voluntary compliance agreement. That has proven to be very effective in achieving voluntary compliance for a significant number of properties. Not 100%, but just that process that says, we're concerned about your performance, we're considering certifying you as blighted. And the results have been quite successful in Reading. The other thing to bear in mind is that even if you can't follow up with condemnation and the use of eminent domain, the certification lasts for 10 years. And so there's an opportunity to use that in showing a court that the property has been documented as blighted. And that can be useful in connection with conservatorship, which has proven to be a great alternative in certain cases to eminent domain. It's an opportunity for an individual or a nonprofit organization or another affected party to petition the court to turn over the responsibility for upgrading the property to an independent third party, a qualified developer who in some cases can put up the property for sale after the improvements are completed. Again, this is a niche opportunity, but I think the niche has proven to be wider than many people thought when the legislation was passed a few years ago. Where it does work, it's a lot more reliable than the tax sale, much cheaper, much faster than eminent domain. And then in Pennsylvania, there's been a lot of activity associated with the use of land bank powers, and in a number of places where I've worked with local and county officials to enter into land bank power planning, frequently the approach is one in which the goal is not to acquire neglected property and to have the land bank be the owner of neglected property, but simply to use the land bank's power strategically to pull properties that are located in certain target areas or priority areas for the jurisdiction, to pull those properties off the tax collection sale list with the approval of the Tax Claim Bureau and the others who need to approve this, and to convey them immediately to pre-qualified developers so that you have a chance of influencing the direction that those properties that have gone out for the tax collection sale take and ensure that they're going to be developed in a manner that's consistent with the priorities of the jurisdiction. So there's a lot to talk about. Fortunately, the Housing Alliance's From Blight to Bright guide has recently been updated. It's really helpful. You should take a look at it. There's the URL. It's especially useful in that for every initiative that they identify, there is a statutory reference, but there's also information about what it does, when it can be used, and some information about where it has been used in Pennsylvania so that you can look at an existing model and make an intelligent decision about whether and how this initiative makes sense for you. So with that, I will pass this on to Amanda and Jesse.
Thanks, John. And thanks to the Pennsylvania Housing Alliance, who's been such an important partner as we've gotten not only the code enforcement program up and running, but also the land bank. Let's see here. Okay. So code enforcement has been on the Turtle Creek Valley COG's radar since 2008. And really at that time, we really felt that our role was just to keep the conversation going about code enforcement because really any successful shared service program through the COG is a result of the towns really it being their idea and they're wanting to do a project. Those result in successful projects, whereas, you know, if we would start a code enforcement program without that local support, it probably would not have been as successful. So since about 2008, we meet regularly with our managers on a monthly basis, and code enforcement was often a topic at those meetings. Really sitting at the COG level, we could kind of see across the board that code enforcement really was a need and maybe wasn't being enacted as efficiently as it could be. And knowing the beneficial effects that code enforcement has on a community, we just thought it was important to keep that conversation going. And then we partnered with the now Steel Rivers COG, and we did a cost of blight study, which really boosted that conversation. And in 2014, we had a couple of towns who approached us who were interested in trying to see if we could get a program started through the COG. and that was Churchill and Wilkins Township. So we formed a small committee of the municipal managers, and in the case of Wilkins Township, there was a very experienced code enforcement officer on staff who was looking toward retirement, and he was also sat on that committee and was very instrumental in shaping the program and really helped us get a foothold on what we needed to do. The ideas that were discussed in that smaller committee were often vetted with the managers committee, and we tried to garner best practices from all of the communities in the Turtle Creek COG. We have 20. So with that said, we started our pilot program in March of 2015 with Wilkins Township and Churchill Borough. And through all of the things that we learned, also with the Pennsylvania Housing Alliance, we knew it was important to create a really good database. And so we worked towards that end in creating that tool. The reasons why our members really wanted a COG-based code enforcement program is a lot of times they were not real happy with third parties or maybe with some of the staff. They saw a lack of follow-up from them. And in some of our communities, there was a lack of resources to pay for full-time and certified inspectors. So, oftentimes we saw maybe police doing it when they had time to do it, or they would hire a part-time person who, wasn't making a whole lot of money and had no health benefits, and maybe wasn't, didn't get the appropriate training that's necessary to do the job. There was a perception, and I think still to some degree there's a perception that there's not enough to do to fill a full-time position, and there were a lot of turnover with the part-time positions. And again, that dissatisfaction with the third parties. So why we felt that a multi-municipal solution was beneficial is that we were able to hire full-time employees who can work part-time in participating towns, so that those towns that really can't afford a full-time professional could still get the benefit of that professional. We could also provide education and certification, and we do make sure that all of our code enforcement officers are getting certifications and continuing education. And then again, providing that effective technology and, just really when you have limited resources, that technology really helps to streamline the process and just make best use of the code enforcement officer's time. And then the municipality of Monroeville, who was not part of the pilot program or the code enforcement program, donated their first vehicle to us. And really great partnerships that we have with a lot of our towns who see a benefit to having good quality code enforcement in neighboring towns. It's a benefit to them too. So finding regional solutions is great because you can oftentimes have irresponsible property owners in many different communities, and when you have officers working in those communities, they learn very quickly who they are and are able to address problems on a multi-municipal basis. It ensures neighboring communities are practicing at the same level of enforcement, and helps to allow for new tools in the legislation. Also, working through the COG, it gives access to a larger network, like the Pennsylvania Housing Alliance, the Local Government Academy, and the Tri-COG Collaborative, which has been really helpful. So in our program highlights, we have really, it's been a work and continues to be a work in progress of our database. We are looking now to get it to be a cloud-based system so that communities can go in at their convenience and look, what's happening with a specific case and different things like that. Reporting mechanisms to keep municipal staff and council informed. That was one of the big things that came out of our managers' meetings and just vetting this information with our managers so that we could really provide them with the information that they needed to see. We try and make sure that our code enforcement is data-driven, enabling the officer to be both reactive and proactive. And one nice highlight of our program is that we have centralized administration. So our officers are out in the field with tablets like John talked about, and they can, for example, shoot the violation letters to a printer in our office, and then somebody in the office can go ahead and mail those letters, which just helps to maximize the officer's time in the field. So we've grown since we started the program, and we're up to 6 towns. We have Churchill, Pitcairn, Wilmering, East McKeesport, Wilkins, and most recently Chalfont Borough. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Jesse Lachemia. You know, you can have the best technology in the world, but if you don't have good staff, that's where it starts, is really finding really good people who care about their jobs and want to do a good job for the towns. And Jesse is certainly one of those people, so I will turn this over to him.
Thank you, Amanda. Hello, everyone. I'm Jesse Lachemia. I'm one of the code enforcement officers here at the Turtle Creek Valley Council of Governments. One of our most important tools that we use here is our database, mainly because it's really important for us to be in the field, just like John was saying, communicating with the public and trying to help inform them and help them understand how important it is to maintain your property, and to, you know, giving them the opportunity to tell us about whether or not they're being taken advantage of by a bad landlord, or if they have problems, you know, elsewhere in the area. So being able to take the database out into the field with us and use it is a very big deal. It's been customized. We've been working with the database engineer on this to make it so that it's more streamlined to our needs. All the information that we can input into it, you know, it's been a work in progress, but we've managed to get it so that it's all relevant and it's easily accessible for us. A lot of it is, you know, being able to search for properties while we're in the field and find out who the owners are, and being able to log information quickly. That way we can continue to you know, work with the people rather than spending more time locked inside of an office somewhere doing data entry. Now this is a layout of what our screen looks like. Now we have it set up so that it takes a lot less effort for us to find the violations and input them into our letters and our logs. So what we do is everything's already input into our database, so that the ordinances are all listed out and they're easy to find. So we can go to a place, if we see a violation, we can list the date that it needs to be in compliance by. It lists our officers. We can log all of if it has to go to court, we can log all of the information that goes on through there, and we're able to add in the violations one by one into the database to track them for you know, further information for reports and all the other things that we need to generate through this. Now that really helps out when it comes to generating our violation letters, because each one of those violations that we add into the tabs, it automatically generates into our violation letter, and that saves us. Having worked without it in different townships before I started here, I can tell you that saves an amazing amount of time, and it allows us to be more accessible for the for the citizens of a community, rather than having to, you know, be stuck in an office somewhere looking through the book and constantly digging up the exact literature of a ordinance. Now, I mean, the violation letters can be altered so that we can add in the specifics about the violations, and then we can sign it and then print it out here at the office, and someone mails it out, you know, in a timely manner. That way everything can still be done quickly while allowing us to be in the field. Now we have multiple available reports, and these are mainly for the boroughs that we work with, so that they can see what it is that we're doing, and that way they can kind of get an understanding of where we're spending our time. But a lot of these, like the activity summary, the code violations by month, the inspections that we do, when they're all logged out, it actually helps us understand what's going to happen. It helps us anticipate what sort of violations or what sort of changes are going to be happening in the town within a year. There's a lot of time. I can tell you right now that looking at some of our townships, there's a lot of moving in rental properties in the fall versus the spring, which is kind of a strange trend, but using these reports, it helps us log that, and we can anticipate it and prepare for it for the next year. We've been working on getting the occupancy inspections, which are one of our greatest tools in helping prevent blight in the towns. We've generated these reports so that we can do them while we're in the field. Now, the occupancy inspection itself is so important because it helps us get into the property and make sure that the property is safe for habitation. And we also do another type of inspection, which is more complaint-based, and it's if a tenant calls us and they're complaining that there's multiple violations, such as they think they have a sewage leak in the walls, or they think that the electrical is faulty, or their windows leak every time it rains. They call us, and we'll go out and we'll do this exact same type of inspection, except we call it a IPMC inspection, which is an International Property Maintenance Code inspection. And it's just so that we can see whether or not the building is or their unit is within compliance, to make sure that they're safe in their homes. We have it set up so that you can immediately pull up the ordinances that relate to the inspection, and you can check off whether it passes or fails, and add in to the slots, more specifically, what it was that failed in the inspection. It's really important for us to be able to do this in the field, and then to email it or generate it while we're in the field. That way it creates an immediate list for the landlord or homeowner to have available for when they are going to go make these repairs. Now this is an example of one of our occupancy inspection reports, and the totals. This is an activity summary report as well. It helps us, just like I was saying before, understand what sort of trends are going on in the town, how many inspections are happening, how many are failing. It also helps us gain an understanding of who could be a problem landlord if they're consistently failing inspections and never coming into compliance. And it keeps logs, which are very important if you wind up having to go to the magistrate. That way we can prove that we've inspected these places multiple times, and these are the violations that we find. It's one of our greatest tools is our outstanding actions reports, which helps us with the large volume that we are constantly dealing with, maintain a list of problems that are unresolved and popping back up into our sites. Now, it also helps us get these back off of our lists and into compliance, and we can, from this list, we can generate a better strategy on finding a way to get properties into compliance and moving forward with the town from there. It also helps us communicate with, as it was stated before, it's really important for code enforcement and the rest of the fire departments and the police departments to communicate together. That way we all understand where the problems are in towns and what we can do to prevent them. The property status is one of the most important for the police and the fire departments. Having them know that a place is either vacant or occupied, it makes a major difference in what's going to happen with that property. If you know a place is vacant and it's on fire, you know that if you have to go into the building, you're not going to be attacked by dogs or anything like that. And it's kind of a strange thing, but I've seen examples of this where we've had properties that were supposed to be vacant and abandoned, and there were squatters living inside them. And when we went to go board them up, you found people living inside them, which is a problem, and it helps us keep a focus on with the police to pay attention to the properties that should be vacant, and if there's activities in them to inform us. That way accidents don't happen like that. One of the tools that we like to use is the GIS mapping, and it just helps demonstrate what exactly where things are happening in the town, and it helps us create a better strategy on where we can spend our time and how we can map out our routes that we're going to spend that day to more efficiently use the time that we have, which in most of our towns it's all part-time that we're spending there, maybe 20 hours a week or less. So being able to optimize what we do with our time is very important, and this is one of our greater tools that we use for that. It also helps demonstrate to the supervisors and managers what's going on in their town. That way it gives everybody a better understanding of things. I think that's it for me.
Thank you, John, Amanda, and Jesse. Now we're going to answer questions from the audience. If you'd like to ask a question, you can type it into the chat box on the lower left of the screen, or you can press *7 to unmute and ask your question. Are there any questions? Again, it's *7 to unmute and *6 to mute yourself again. Are there any questions before we conclude the webinar today?
Hello? Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't have a question, but I have two suggestions that I found effective in Mount Lebanon, if anyone would like to, is interested in hearing them.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. With regard to properties that are before they're sold, if they have violations on them, what I've created is a page. It's called an affidavit to abate, and I require that to be notarized, and that's included with our lien letters, preventing that property from being closed upon until it's agreed that it's going to be fixed. So I'll actually hold up the sale of that property until that's the violation's abated. And with regard to the ticketing I heard earlier, I think it's very interesting. What I've done is I've created it's about a half a page, and it's kind of like it's reminiscent of a police warning, but I've changed the word warning to courtesy request to add the element of friendliness to it. And basically I'll leave that behind, and it just reads, Mount Lebanon Municipal Office of Code Enforcement, courtesy request to abate property maintenance violation. And I give people, say, 2 or 3 days to take care of something easy. before I send out an official violation notice. So I just thought I'd share those 2 items.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
This is John Cromer. Am I back on? If so, I think the second point is really important. Again, to try to notify people of the problem and to get them to respond voluntarily before you issue the ticket. I think the reverse of that is the Blighted Property Review Committee process, where it's helpful to have an official-looking letter that makes it clear that your property is being considered for certification, so that hopefully the owner will realize that this is serious and that there's a need to take this issue seriously. So the nature of the communication and the variation in the communication is really important. That's a great example.
All right, any additional comments or questions? All right, there doesn't seem to be any additional questions. I'm going to give everyone just another moment if they'd like to ask anything. Again, that's *7 to unmute and *6 to mute. All right, no additional questions. This concludes today's webinar. Thanks again to everyone who has presented and to all of you for participating. All right, and have a great, I'm sorry, we actually do have a question. How about providing help to low-income landlords? Was the question. John and Amanda, do you have anything to say regarding help to low-income landlords?
That's a tough one because so many of the landlords are not big property owners that own large apartment buildings. Some of them are, but many of them are just individuals who only own one property or only own a couple of properties. There are not a lot of public programs that are available to help people at this level, but I think what can be helpful is just doing the data work that Jesse referred to, finding out who they are, finding out what the issue is and what the willingness of the individual is to deal with the problem, and then seeing if some assistance can be provided. And the form of assistance that I think is probably going to be most likely is going to be a home equity loan of some type in which the property is used as collateral. And in that respect, it may be that if there's an intermediary organization like a community development financial institution available, that CDFI might be helpful in reviewing the opportunity to provide a loan and to assist in underwriting the loan. But that's probably the best bet, and in light of the fact that there's not a lot of government assistance available. So finding out where the CDFI support is in your area and looking into that opportunity, I think, might be the best bet.
But if I could add to that, I would just say that you probably shouldn't be a landlord if you can't come up to the basic standards of the International Property Maintenance Code. That might sound harsh, but really, we're not asking people to have the Taj Mahal, we're just asking for it to be safe.
Okay, thank you, John and Amanda. Are there any questions before we conclude the webinar today? All right, I'd like to conclude the webinar for today. Thanks again for presenting and for participating. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you.